The genocide was a product of centuries-old intractable divisions between Hutu and Tutsi tribes. What's wrong with that sentence? They're not tribes, and there's no history of 100 years of conflict. So our knowledge of these societies is truly not very deep. So very quickly, why did it happen? Colonial powers, culture, the media, churches, and ideology. Why didn't anybody intervene? What happened to our international community? The US, the UN, the French, and the churches. Very briefly, I'll talk about the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal in Arusha, Gacaca, which is the world's greatest experience in post-genocide conflict resolution, and then the progress in the last 25 years. So it was 25 years ago, April 7th, and I said to Bonaventure, okay, I mean, we're best friends now, what happened? He said, yeah, I heard the plane crash, and the barricades went up 10 minutes after. Kigali's a small town. From anywhere within the city, you would have heard that. So let's see what happened. These 10 stages are very important. Greg Stanton, a scholar of genocide, has documented with every genocide that we know of, these are 10 stages that are replicated. They're important because we're not in a good place right now in the US, folks. And I would never say we're near conflict, but we are in some stages that give me pause. First, people were classified, Tutsi and Hutu. Tutsi and Hutu had intermarried, have the same language, have the same culture. So very deliberately, you're Tutsi, you're Hutu. Well, might not have mattered, but the Belgians, who were the colonial power for a while, said, well, you have to know who people are, so you have to have an identity card. Why an identity card? For taxes. On that identity card said whether you were Hutu or a Tutsi. So when those roadblocks went up and people came up, they knew who was Tutsi and who was Hutu. So the second is a symbol, identity cards. Discrimination begins, quotas and laws against the group you're after. Dehumanization. You cannot kill your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, unless they have been dehumanized in every genocide, whether we're talking about the Holocaust, whether we're talking about the genocide against the Tutsi. So the dehumanization begins. There has to be an organization to carry it out. In Rwanda, it was the militias, the Interahamwe. Polarization begins, laws forbidding marriage or work for the government. And then you have to have the resources. You have to prepare for the final solution. Stage 7, 500,000 machetes were shipped from China to Rwanda in January 1994. More came in through France. Persecution and killings and the extermination. And unfortunately, stage 10 is always part of it. There's always denial, as there was after the Holocaust. There is in Rwanda, the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, the very brave soldiers, women and men, about a third women, who stopped it. There's all sorts of craziness out there. They started it, they created it. So these 10 stages have been replicated. Important to keep in mind as I run quickly through this. So how was Rwanda ruled? Before colonization, it was a feudal kingdom with Tutsi chiefs. Quote, ethnic distinctions were fluid, social mobility was commonplace. If you remember your history, in 1885, when the Conference of Berlin, Rwanda was, quote, given to the Germans. But under the Treaty of Versailles in 1923, Rwanda was designated a protectorate of the League of Nations governed by Belgium. The Tutsi kings ruled indirectly for the Belgians. So if you had to rank order colonial powers, how were the Belgians? Terrible. Look at the Congo. Look at what they did in the Congo. So probably the most brutal colonial powers. And they ruled indirectly. And so people began to think the Tutsis represented the Belgians in some way. This is President Kagame speaking at the commemoration. All genocides begin with an ideology, a system of ideas that says this group of people here, they are less human. They deserve to be exterminated. The most devastating legacy of European control of Rwanda was the transformation of social distinctions into so-called races. We were classified and dissected, and whatever differences existed were magnified according to a framework invented elsewhere. The purpose was neither scientific nor benign, but ideological, to justify colonial claims to rule over and, quote, civilize supposedly lesser people. We are not. This ideology was already in place in the 19th century and was then entrenched by the French missionaries who settled here Rwanda's 2,000 years of history were reduced to a series of caricatures based on Bible passages and on myths told to explorers. Totally accurate. So what was this ideology? What was this hypothesis, the Hamitic hypothesis? European racial theorists developed a notion out of thin air that Tutsis were a superior race, intellectually gifted, born to rule. John Speake, the first European to explore the Nile, published The Theory of Conquest of Inferior by Superior Races. The Tutsis were a Caucasoid tribe of Ethiopian origin descended from King David, the sons of Ham. We can see the Caucasian skulls and beautiful Greek profiles side by side with Semitic and even Jewish features. Over time, the Tutsis were taller than the Hutus, tall and thin, and looked a little more like us, so they had to be superior. The Hutus were peasants. The Tutsi differ absolutely by the beauty of their features and their light color from the Bantu agriculturalists of an inferior type. The Tutsis were designated as the Hamites. By the missionaries, racism began. Remember, Hutu and Tutsi had intermarried, had the same language and culture, so it was a physical appearance that led to this division. So these myths conditioned the views and the actions of the colonists and had a big impact on the Rwandans. Maybe nothing would have happened, but you combine this with the introduction of those identity cards in 1933 and 34, because your identity then, that's who you are. You're a Hutu, you're a Tutsi. You've got your card to tell you who you are. So in the period of decolonization in the late 50s, in 58, 59, the killings began with impunity. Over 30,000 Tutsis were killed as political power began to shift to the Hutus as the Belgians pulled out. More killings in 63, 66, 67. Impunity. 100,000 Tutsis flee to Uganda and Congo. And the first regime, post-colonial, the Kayibanda regime, imprisoned or killed most Tutsi power holders. The Habyarimana regime is the genocidal regime from 73 to 94, and they came up with their own ideology, Hutu power, based entirely on discrimination. So here's the Hutu power ideology that led to the genocide. Rwanda belongs to the Hutu, who were always its true inhabitants. They were brutally subjugated for centuries by the foreign masses. Foreign masses weren't the Belgians. They weren't the Germans, because the Tutsis had now been associated with the colonial powers. The Hutu represent the majority of the people, and they are the sole defense against the Tutsis' evil attempt to enslave us again. This racist ideology was supported by the missionaries, the media, and the church, all the major institutions in the country. So as I said, those identity cards were critically important. The refugees who are out of the country in Uganda, Congo, Europe, even in the US, wanted to come home. But they were told, there's no more room. We don't want you home. And then the Hutu ideology begins on RTLM, which is radio, television, Nilkolin. So this begins to be broadcast in 93. This is the hardest one for me, raised as a Catholic. The Hutu 10 Commandments, folks. Published in Kangura, that would be Newsweek in the United States, right? It laid down a catechism for dealing with the Tutsi. The 10th commandment was any contact with the Tutsi was an act of treason, and it was the duty of every Hutu to spread widely this ideology and exterminate the Inyenzi. Inyenzi are cockroaches. Anybody studied the Holocaust? Same thing. Vermin, cockroaches. It was hard to believe this. As I said, I've been working in Rwanda since 96 now. But when I saw it, Rwandan has the original. Here's the front page of Kangura, and there's the 10 Commandments. And it's chilling to see this in person. I'll show you in a minute who's on the back page of that particular issue of Kangura. So, that was the churches. They're saying it's an act of treason to work with the Tutsis, and it gets worse. The 10th Commandment, exterminate those Inyenzi. Media. The media always plays a role in violence, in genocide. The hate radio was the major one. It began broadcasting in '93. It coincided because the government bought a bunch of cheap radios and passed them out. And this particular broadcast was designed to appeal to the illiterate, the unemployed, the thugs, and the street militia. The dehumanization has begun. It was broadcast mainly in Rwanda, the local language. The planning began for all of this, unfortunately developed by a history professor out of Butare, University of Rwanda. And the hate messages began in October of 1993. And as I sat in Arusha listening to those trials, I heard what was on that radio station. Hate is the only word. In November of 1993, and one of you reminded me that the U.S. ambassador at the time lived next door to the Prime Minister, Agatha, and she was one of the first killed during the genocide. Sorry. So April 3rd, there are many Rwandans, Tutsis, trying to come back into the country. There's a great deal of fighting going on. President Habyarimana signs a peace agreement in Arusha with the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, saying, I will share power, under intense pressure from neighbors and the international donor community, including the US. And as you may have read, if you've seen any movies or anything on his flight back into Kigali, the plane was shot down. President Kagame has been accused of shooting it down, but it looks very much like it was someone within his government because he had signed this peace agreement. And as I said, the genocide began within 30 minutes. Roadblocks are up. You come up to a roadblock, show us your ID card. If you're Hutu, you go on. If you're a Tutsi, you're killed. 1 million dead in 100 days. The most brutal genocide of our time as a species. The dead of Rwanda accumulated at nearly 3 times the rate of the Jewish dead during the Holocaust. It was the most efficient mass killing since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The first book out was by a friend, Phil Gorovich, who's a journalist. Interesting title, right? We wish to inform you that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. Where in the world did that title come from? Anybody know? So Phil was in Kigali not long after the genocide, and he walked into a church. 11% of the killings occurred in churches. And he found a note on the floor, and he picked it up. And the Rwandans are very polite people. And somebody had written to his pastor, we wish to inform you, pastor, that tomorrow we will be killed with our families. And of course, no one intervened. Tough story, as I said. So why not? Why didn't any of us do anything? Because we could have stopped this, as we could be stopping Myanmar right now. So UN commanders in Kigali had begged for months for assistance. They knew what was coming. General Dallaire, who's become a close friend, he sent a fax to the UN. He said, I know what's coming. We have found the weapons. We have found the lists of people. Who was chief of peacekeeping? Kofi Annan, who went on to be Secretary General of the UN. He said, no, you can't do anything. Your mandate, that's beyond the mandate that you have as UN troops there. In the midst of us, the Secretary General, in the midst of it, April, May, June, it ended July 4th on our Independence Day. In the middle of it, the Secretary General said, we must recognize that we have failed. Well, we were still failing at that moment and have acquiesced in the continued loss of life. Our readiness and capacity has been demonstrated to be inadequate at best and deplorable at worst. And he was right. There was no collective political will to respond to this little country in East Africa. Why did the churches intervene? The churches are the moral voices of our society, and Rwanda has always been a very religious place. As you can see, 90% Christian, 63% Catholic, 20% Protestant, and so on. Church leaders did more than remain silent, unfortunately. And I think my next book, if I can ever get up the courage, will be How Did Thou Shalt Not Kill Become Thou Shalt Kill? Because more people were killed in church buildings than anywhere else. And And the question, of course, is, were the churches complicit? Well, why? How in the world did this happen, right? The missionaries, like the Germans and the Belgians, had bought into this. Rwanda was a country of two different human groups. And some have described it as a Hutu church and a Hutu state was the declared goal. The deep hatred of the Tutsis was understood to be in accord with sincere love of the church. And there were massive human rights violations leading up to the genocide. Tutsis sought refuges in the churches. I asked Bonaventure, what in the world did you do when that plane crashed? He said, I got my family. We got in two cars because we hoped one car would make it. And we came up to the roundabout, and he said the killers were drunk. That's how they did it. Alcohol was deeply involved in this. And they're at the roundabout. And he said they were distracted. So he got through, both cars got through, and they went to a San Famille church, which is right in downtown Kigali, and they hid there. And they certainly were looking for him because they knew exactly who he was and that he had just come back from the United States. So his wife and his immediate family survived in the church. The rest of his family did not. But here's a church, Naimata, which I visited not long after the genocide. My kin in Rwanda is not very good, but it basically says there will be revisionists who will say this did not happen, that there were not killings in the churches, so we're leaving it the way we found it. And that's what it looks like inside. So, several nuns have been convicted of genocide. The Seventh-day Adventist was convicted in the International Court of Justice. And as I said, 11% of the victims killed in the churches. So the religious folks, there were some who did protect Tutsis, mainly the Muslims. There's about 2% of the population was Muslim at the time, and there are Muslims who hit the Tutsis. How about the U.S.? Powerful warnings of what were coming. The CIA, there was a report in 1993 that 500,000 people could die. At my last job before I went overseas, I was a dean and associate provost in California, and our general counsel had been the general counsel in the CIA. And I said one day, Elizabeth, why didn't you guys do anything? And her words were chilling. She said, Margee, if you ever could know how many reports like that we get, she said, we didn't know what was going to happen. Well, we'll see. If you remember that time, 1994, what was that movie, Black Hawk Down or something? Have any of you seen? We had just lost soldiers in Somalia, dragged through the streets of Mogadishu in body bags. So there was not a lot of desire to go into another, quote, small African state. In fact, the State Department said we're reluctant to intervene in another African nation where American interests, quote, were non-existent. Even when it became clear what was unfolding, President Clinton told the UN it had to learn when to say no. We actually know we went farther than that. Then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright blocked the UN from intervening. Not a good story of American power. At the height of the killing, State Department spokesman was a woman, were instructed not to use the word genocide. There's a very famous interview, and people are beginning to understand what's unfolding. And this woman is asked, is a genocide occurring in Rwanda? And she kept saying, acts of genocide are occurring. Acts of, but she would not say it was genocide. Why? Because we had signed the Genocide Convention, which required us to intervene if the genocide was unfolding. Sorry about this. I'm trying to get this right. At the height of the genocide in April, we opened the new Holocaust Museum, and President Clinton said it serves as a constant reminder that racism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of hatred are ever-present dangers, and indifference to hatred makes us complicit in some way. He said, I did not appreciate the scale of the killings. The NSA archives that have just been opened make it very clear the Clinton administration was very aware of what was unfolding, getting daily reports on the killing. In fact, I interviewed once a guy from the Pentagon who was monitoring RTLM, the hate radio, which we could have turned off. And I said, why didn't we just shut that thing down? And he said, well, we were told it was a free speech issue. So I'm hard on everybody, but I have to say the French were the worst in this, and they're just beginning to admit what they did. France was very closely aligned with the regime of President Habyarimana, which carried out the genocide. Mitterrand, socialist, right? His government armed and trained the army and the militias. There's strong evidence that France continued to arm the regime during the genocide. Operation Turquoise, they flew in French troops and they let the genocidaires go into that part of the country and they flew them out to France. The archives have just been opened and I think we'll learn a lot about French. In fact, if I can get this to work, sorry, I think it's the battery. There we go. Remember I said the kangura with the 10 Commandments? This was the back page. It says, Mitterrand, a good friend of Rwanda. The media was deeply involved. The survivor said, I listened to the RTLM because if you were mentioned on the airways, you were soon to be carted off in a short time. The dehumanization piece, Tutsi were described as vermin, snakes, dogs, kill them or they will kill us. Exterminate the Ensign, the cockroach. I actually sat through the trials. They were called the media trials at the ICTR in Arusha. The first time the editors were sentenced to 35 to life, and the Kangura editor sentenced to life